Chapter 1. The Unexpected Visitor. Kieran O'Malley never expected to find love in a way that would completely upend his quiet, predictable life. It was the kind of evening where everything seemed to fall into place, a rhythm that had become almost second nature to him. The old workshop, cluttered with various parts and machines, buzzed with the sound of tools working their way through the intricate pieces that he was carefully assembling. It wasn't much, just a small, worn-down garage tucked away in the heart of the city's industrial district, but it was his sanctuary. The walls, lined with shelves filled with spare parts and unfinished projects, seemed to whisper stories of the past, of people who had come before him, fixing things, creating things, just as he did. Kieran's hands moved almost instinctively, reaching for another tool, tightening a screw on a particular engine he had been refurbishing for days. He didn't mind the long hours. There was something peaceful about the repetitive motions, the feeling of creating something out of nothing, the satisfaction of turning broken pieces into something functional once again. His family had never been particularly wealthy, but they had always been practical. His father, a mechanic by trade, had passed down the shop to Kieran when he had passed away. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. It paid the bills, and Kieran had always found a certain comfort in the hum of engines and the whir of machinery. He was content. Or he thought he was. It was hard to say, really. He had spent years honing his craft, perfecting his skills, and in some ways, it had become his entire world. The idea of anything disrupting that world had never crossed his mind. That is, until the door of the workshop swung open with a force that made the metal frame of the door creak under the strain. Kieran's heart skipped a beat as he froze mid-motion, a wrench still in his hand, and turned toward the sudden noise. He had expected a delivery of parts, or perhaps a neighbor asking for help with a minor repair. What he had not expected was what stood in the doorway, a figure who seemed completely out of place in his small, cramped workshop. The woman, or rather, the being who appeared before him, was nothing short of extraordinary. She stood there, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the setting sun, which streamed through the narrow windows of the workshop. Kieran's first instinct was to ask if she needed help, if she had come to the wrong place. But the moment she stepped into the workshop, his thoughts froze. She wasn't human, not in the way that he or anyone around him was human. There was something otherworldly about her. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent sheen, like the surface of a soap bubble catching the light. Her eyes, wide and curious, gleamed with a depth that was almost too intense to look at for long. They were not the warm brown or bright blue of the humans Kieran knew, but instead a striking shade of violet that seemed to change with every movement. It was as though they were windows into a different world altogether, one filled with mystery and unspoken stories. She was small, almost delicate in her appearance, yet there was a strength in her posture, a silent confidence that made Kieran instinctively take a step back. Her hair, dark and flowing, cascaded down her back in thick waves, shimmering in the faint light. It was not just long but had an unnatural grace to it, as if each strand moved with a purpose. Her clothes were unlike anything Kieran had seen before, sleek and form-fitting, made of a material that seemed to shift color subtly as she moved, reflecting the fading sunlight in an almost ethereal way. The fabric itself was alien, unlike the fabrics he was accustomed to seeing in everyday life, soft yet durable, and almost entirely free of any visible seams. He could see that she was carrying something with her, an object that looked like a small metal case, its edges sharp and angular, completely foreign to anything that Kieran had ever worked with. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Kieran's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Was this some kind of prank? Was he dreaming? He blinked hard, trying to shake off the confusion, but when his gaze met hers again, there was no denying it. She was real. His workshop, so familiar and comforting only moments ago, suddenly felt too small, too insignificant for the strange being now standing in his space. The alien woman seemed to take in her surroundings with a sense of calm that belied her unusual appearance. She didn't seem frightened, nor did she seem to be in any kind of distress. Instead, there was a purpose to her movements as she stepped further into the workshop, her eyes scanning the cluttered room with a discerning gaze. Kieran couldn't help but feel a strange sense of curiosity mixed with a surge of protectiveness. It was the kind of feeling that crept up on you when you saw something or someone so far removed from the ordinary that you knew you had to act, but had no idea how to begin. Finally, she spoke. Her voice, though soft, carried an air of authority that sent a shiver down Kieran's spine. "I've come for spare parts," she said, her tone calm, but with an edge of urgency. Her accent was unfamiliar, lilting in a way that sounded musical but foreign to him. It was the kind of voice that made you want to listen, not just hear. "I need materials. Very specific materials. I've been searching for some time." Kieran blinked, the confusion still gripping him as he tried to process her words. Spare parts? What kind of spare parts could she possibly need? His shop wasn't known for its parts for spacefaring vessels or alien technology. He barely had enough for the local cars and machines. "I don't know what you mean," Kieran said, finally finding his voice, though it wavered with uncertainty. "Spare parts for what? For your ship?" The woman's lips parted in a small, almost amused smile, though the sadness in her eyes made it clear that she was not here for amusement. She reached into her bag and produced the metal case she had been holding, placing it gently on the workbench in front of Kieran. As she did, the small object began to hum faintly, emitting a soft glow from within. Kieran couldn't help but step closer, drawn to it despite his better judgment. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. "I'm a traveler," she continued, her voice still calm but tinged with something darker now. "I'm from far away. My ship is damaged. The parts one need are specific, and Earth's technology is not exactly compatible. I've been searching for someone who might understand. And I found you." She paused, meeting his gaze. "I need you to help me. You're my last hope." Jason's mind spun. She was from another world? A traveler? A being from a distant star system? This wasn't happening. The words were too much to process. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him, asking for his help in a way that felt too personal, too urgent for him to ignore. He wasn't prepared for this. He was a simple mechanic, not someone who worked on intergalactic technology. But the woman's eyes, the sheer determination and vulnerability in them, drew him in. He had worked on a variety of strange machines, yes, but never something like this. "What kind of parts are you looking for?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief, but also curiosity. She handed him the case, and as Kieran took it, he felt the coolness of it against his fingertips. It was unlike anything he had ever held, yet it felt strangely familiar, as if his hands were meant to grasp it. "I need components for my ship's energy core. Specifically, I need high-density capacitors, superconducting materials, and dash." Kieran's eyes widened as she mentioned the specific parts she needed. He had seen similar components used in experimental engines at some of the more cutting-edge research labs on Earth, but this wasn't something you just found lying around. This was advanced, alien technology. He glanced at her, his thoughts racing. "I can try to help," he said cautiously, "but I don't know if I have the resources you need. I don't work on ships, not of this kind." She gave him a small, understanding smile, though it held a trace of sadness. "I know, but I believe you can. You are a mechanic, aren't you?" Kieran couldn't argue with that. But helping her? Getting involved in something so far beyond anything he had ever imagined? He was scared, but also strangely compelled. There was a quiet connection between them, a sense of something deeper than mere words. "Well, I'll see what I can do," Kieran said, his voice steadying as he set the case down on his workbench. "I'll do my best." And with that, the course of his life shifted forever. Kieran sat back in his worn-out chair, eyes still fixed on the metal case she had handed him. It was both delicate and sturdy, humming with a subtle energy that didn't seem entirely natural. He couldn't stop himself from running his fingers over its smooth surface, feeling the slight vibrations, as though the object itself had a life of its own. He had worked with machines his whole life: engines, vehicles, electronics, but this was something entirely different. Whatever technology she was talking about, it was beyond anything he had ever encountered. He looked up at her again. Her eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that sent a strange shiver down his spine. Despite her otherworldly appearance, there was a vulnerability about her that drew him in. She wasn't some cold, calculating alien from a sci-fi novel. No, there was something raw, something deeply human in her expression. Her face, though slightly exotic in its features, held emotions that were familiar: fear, hope, and a deep sense of loss. It was as though she had been torn from her home and left to drift, alone and uncertain, on this strange planet. "Are you sure you came to the right place?" Kieran asked, his voice softer now, though still laced with doubt. He wasn't equipped for something like this. Sure, he could fix machines and engines, but alien technology? He had no idea where to even begin. The woman, this alien, This traveler nodded, her gaze unwavering. I've been to many places, asked many people. But your skill, your reputation, it led me here. The technology one need requires a mind that can think beyond what is possible. Your work with Earth's machines, your ability to understand the innermost mechanics, it's rare. I've studied your kind. You are resourceful. Her words were heavy with meaning. The way she spoke of him, her belief in his abilities, was almost too much for him to bear. Kieran had spent years tinkering with engines, repairing broken-down vehicles, and solving mechanical problems. But being told that he had the skills necessary to help an alien fix her spaceship was an entirely new level of pressure. He wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of responsibility. Wait, Kieran said, his hand resting on the edge of the workbench. I'm not a specialist in starships or whatever kind of technology you're talking about. I fix things. Simple things. Stuff that runs on Earth. Not whatever this is. He gestured to the case, now resting in front of him, his voice tinged with uncertainty. The alien woman watched him for a moment, her gaze softening as she took a few steps closer. Your knowledge transcends what you realize, she said, her voice calm, yet filled with something deep, something he couldn't quite place. You see the world in a way that few others can. You understand the way things work, the connections between them. That's all I need. I don't need you to know the science of it all. I need you to help me fix what is broken. I need you to help me find a way to keep my people's legacy alive. She paused, and the weight of her words hung in the air between them. Kieran felt the stirrings of something inside him, a sense of duty to help, to fix what was wrong. Something in her plea resonated with him, stirring emotions he had long buried under years of solitary work. It wasn't just about fixing a machine or getting paid. There was something personal about this, a connection that he couldn't ignore. He swallowed hard, trying to push the lump in his throat down. I'm not a hero, he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. I just fix things. The alien woman stepped forward, her soft, glowing hands reaching out to him. Her fingers grazed the side of his, and for the briefest moment, Kieran felt a surge of warmth pass through him, something gentle, something full of untold promises. She had an air of quiet authority about her, but it wasn't overpowering. It was almost as if she trusted him more than he trusted himself. It was a feeling he didn't quite understand, but it left him reeling with the realization that he was no longer just helping some stranger with an engine problem. He was about to become part of something much, much bigger. You are a hero, she said softly, her voice like a balm, soothing the nerves in his chest. You might not see it now, but what you do here matters. You can help me. You will help me. And together, we will ensure that what was lost is never forgotten. Her words echoed in the back of his mind as she stepped away, allowing him to take a deep breath. She had already turned toward the metal case again, her fingers lightly tracing the edges. The parts one need, she continued, her voice becoming steady once more, are very specific. I've spent years searching for them, and I've come to realize that the only place where I will find what I need is right here on Earth. The technology used in your world is crude, but it is effective. It is far more adaptable than you might realize. Jason stared at her, the confusion still clouding his mind, but the feeling of a budding connection growing between them. This wasn't just about machines or technology. Something else had drawn her to him, something he couldn't explain, but he wasn't about to dismiss. The fact that she was asking him for help, that she had trusted him enough to come here and seek him out, was no small thing. This was more than just fixing a starship. What do you need me to do? Kieran asked, his voice steady now, the doubt slipping away. She smiled softly. First, I need you to understand the importance of what we're about to do, she said. What I've come to Earth to fix isn't just a ship, it's the key to something much larger. The parts you will find will save more than my ship. They will help me find my people. They will help me piece together the broken history of my people. And once we fix it, the rest will fall into place. My legacy, my future, and maybe even the future of your kind. Jason felt the weight of her words settle over him. This wasn't just some repair job. This wasn't just another engine to fix. This was a life-altering event, and Kieran found himself standing at the center of it, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the woman before him. She wasn't just asking for his help. She was asking for his trust, his skill, and his commitment to something that went beyond what he had ever imagined. All right, Kieran said, his voice steady now, the resolve firming inside him. I'll help. I don't know how I can, but I'll help. Her smile widened, and for the first time since she had arrived, Kieran felt as though the weight of the universe had shifted. He wasn't just fixing a machine. He was part of something much bigger, something that would shape the future in ways he couldn't yet understand. Chapter 2. The Blueprint of Hope. Over the next few days, Jason and Nari worked together in the workshop, the once solitary space now alive with purpose and the hum of a strange new mission. The task at hand was no longer just about fixing parts or repairing something broken. It was about finding a way to restore a piece of Nari's lost world, her people, her legacy, and perhaps even her very future. The weight of it all pressed on Jason in a way that he hadn't anticipated. He was just a mechanic, a humble engineer, working in a small shop, fixing ordinary things for ordinary people. But this was something far from ordinary. It didn't take long for Jason to realize just how deep the situation went. Nari, though small in stature, was fierce when it came to her mission. There was no time to waste, no room for hesitation. Every piece of information she shared with him was a small fragment of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that had been scattered across galaxies, and now, it was up to them to put it back together. And the parts she needed, those specialized components that were essential to fixing her ship, weren't just rare. They were nearly impossible to find. Her ship, which Jason had learned was called the Astrius, was far from ordinary. Nari's people had created it long before humanity had even reached the stars, and its technology was both ancient and advanced. The parts required to fix it were beyond anything Jason had ever encountered, and yet, as Nari described them to him in precise detail, he realized that these components weren't so different from the ones used in the most advanced military technology Earth had ever seen. If he could find the right materials, they could make it work. But that was a big if. The first few days were spent cataloging every piece of machinery Jason had at his disposal. He knew that the parts Nari needed were expensive and difficult to come by. He didn't have the luxury of running to a store for high-tech superconductors or the specialized capacitors she described. He would need to think outside the box, repurpose components he already had, and possibly even fabricate new ones. Nari had no shortage of ideas herself. Her knowledge of technology was astounding, even if she was still adjusting to Earth's way of life. Jason often marveled at how seamlessly she picked up on things, her mind absorbing the details with a precision that made him question his own abilities. She was quick, brilliant, and intuitive, qualities that only reinforced her importance in this endeavor. Nari's eyes sparkled with gratitude every time Jason showed the slightest sign of understanding or progress. She had been alone for so long, searching for someone to help her, and now, here they were working side by side, forging a path towards something that neither of them had expected. As they spent more time together, Jason's admiration for her grew. It wasn't just her alien intelligence that impressed him, it was her strength, her resilience, and her determination to push through her trauma and loss. She didn't wallow in despair or give in to hopelessness. She pressed on, searching for answers, no matter how daunting the journey ahead seemed. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Nari and Jason sat down at the small table in the corner of the workshop, the faint smell of oil and grease still hanging in the air around them. They had spent hours discussing the technicalities of the ship's systems, but as the night grew deeper, the conversation shifted. "You've been so kind to me, Jason," Nari said, her voice soft as she leaned back in her chair, looking at him with a quiet intensity. "I don't know how to repay you. I can't thank you enough for helping me, for believing in me." Jason looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly as he tried to think of something to say. "You don't have to thank me," he replied, his tone steady, though his heart felt strange. "You've been through so much, Nari. I don't know what it's like to lose everything like you have, but I do know that no one should go through something like that alone. You're not alone anymore." Nari's gaze softened, her violet eyes locking with his, and for a moment, it felt as if time itself had stopped. Jason couldn't explain why, but the connection between them was undeniable. The tension in the air was palpable, and though neither of them had spoken it aloud, both of them could feel the shift that had taken place. They weren't just two strangers anymore, they had become something more. Jason didn't know if it was the shared purpose that had brought them together, or the way Nari's presence had made him feel something deeper than mere camaraderie. But as they sat together in the workshop, surrounded by tools and machinery, he realized that his feelings for her had changed in ways that went far beyond simple friendship. "I never imagined," Nari continued, her voice quieter now, "that I would find someone like you on Earth. I've been to so many places, asking for help, searching for answers, but no one ever listened. And here you are helping me without question. It's Hard to believe, sometimes. Jason shook his head, unsure of how to respond. I don't know what I'm doing, Nari. I've never worked on a ship like yours. I'm just trying my best to help you. That's all I can do. Her lips parted into a soft smile, one that reached her eyes, and for the first time, Jason saw something in her that wasn't just the focused determination of someone on a mission. There was warmth in her, something deeply human, and he realized, perhaps for the first time, that she was more than just an alien stranger. She was a person, a woman with her own hopes, fears, and dreams. She wasn't some distant being from another world. She was someone who had come into his life and completely changed everything. We're getting closer, Nari said suddenly, her voice breaking through his thoughts. The parts one need. I found a few leads. They're not easy to track down, but we can do this. We have the skill, the knowledge, and the willpower. We're not alone in this. Not anymore. Jason's heart skipped a beat. The words she spoke were full of certainty, and for the first time, he truly believed it. This wasn't just some wild adventure. This was real. They were going to find a way to fix her ship, to bring her people's legacy back to life. And in the process, Jason realized something else. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. And no matter how hard the journey ahead seemed, he wasn't going to back down. Chapter 3. Forging the Future. Jason and Nari's bond grew stronger with each passing day. The small workshop, once a place of solitary work, now hummed with the energy of their shared mission. They spent countless hours poring over blueprints, modifying components, and testing their inventions, all while slowly realizing that they had become a team in the truest sense. Jason's mechanical expertise, combined with Nari's alien knowledge, created a dynamic that neither of them had expected. They complemented each other in ways that felt almost predestined, as if they were two pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Nari's past, once shrouded in mystery, began to reveal itself in fragments. She told him stories of her home planet, Alara's stories of lush landscapes and advanced civilizations that had once thrived under peaceful rule. She spoke of her people with love and pride, but her voice would grow somber when she recounted the day the invaders arrived, when the balance of her world was shattered in a single night. It was a story of loss and survival, of fighting against an enemy so powerful that resistance had seemed futile. Her ship, the Astrius, had been the last hope for her people. Now, it was the only piece of her world she had left. I don't know what I'll do when we fix this ship, Nari confessed one night, her voice soft as she gazed out of the workshop's small window at the stars beyond. I'm not sure what's left for me after all of this. Jason leaned against the workbench, his arms crossed, watching her carefully. Maybe that's not the point, he said, his voice steady. Maybe it's not about what happens afterward. It's about getting there, about making sure your people aren't forgotten. You have a chance to rebuild something, Nari. Something worth fighting for. She turned to him then, her eyes soft, but full of unspoken gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I never thought I'd find someone who understood this. Who understood me. Jason stepped closer, feeling a warmth in his chest that he couldn't explain. The room seemed smaller with her standing so near, but the air between them was electric with a feeling he hadn't realized had been building between them for days. He didn't have an answer for what would happen after they fixed the ship. He didn't know if they would ever find the answers they were searching for. But he did know one thing. Whatever the future held, he was going to face it with her. They were in this together. And that, for the first time in a long time, made Jason feel like he wasn't alone. The work continued unabated in Jason's workshop, the space now more alive than ever before. They had successfully repaired several components of the ship, repurposing parts that Jason had gathered from scrap piles around the city, using his skills to reforge them into something new. There was an unspoken bond between him and Nari as they worked side by side, building not just a ship, but a future for both of them. The weight of their shared purpose had become heavier with each passing day, but it also made their connection feel more real. Nari had been through so much, and yet her strength seemed infinite, rising above the shadows of her past. For Jason, the longer he spent in her company, the more he saw the humanity in her, not just the alien woman who had come to Earth for help, but a person who had known loss, survival, and resilience in the face of unspeakable challenges. Nari, for all her quiet intelligence and composure, had an air of vulnerability that Jason had begun to notice. She would occasionally have moments of silence, moments when her eyes would become distant, haunted by memories that she couldn't escape. The pain was still fresh, the scars of her past lingering in the way she hesitated when talking about her people or her home planet, Alaris. But even in those moments of pain, Jason could see the fire in her determination to survive, to rebuild, and to find meaning in the chaos that had consumed her life. He admired that strength in her, more than he had ever admired anything before. They were both learning from each other, filling in the gaps of their respective worlds with understanding and care. One evening, after another long day of work on the ship, Jason found himself sitting at the small table, a cup of coffee in his hands, the soft hum of the ship's engine parts reverberating through the walls of the workshop. Nari was seated across from him, her hands resting lightly on the table as she stared at the blueprint of the ship's systems. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was an underlying tension, a quiet awareness that both of them had come to understand. "You know," Jason began, his voice low, "there's something about this work, about what we're doing. It feels bigger than fixing a ship. It feels like we're rebuilding something. Not just the ship, but, I don't know, something else." Nari looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the workshop. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile, the first one that wasn't tinged with sorrow or loss. "I know," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "It's strange, isn't it? I came to Earth thinking I was just looking for parts, just a way to survive, to escape. But now I feel like I've found something more. Maybe this is my chance to rebuild. Not just my people's legacy, but my own life. Maybe I can find peace here, on this strange world." Jason set his cup down, his gaze steady on her. There was a flicker of something between them, something unspoken that had been growing over the last few weeks. It wasn't just about fixing a ship. It wasn't just about helping her survive. It was about the connection they had forged, the trust they had built, the understanding that had blossomed between them in such an unlikely way. "We're in this together," Jason said quietly, his voice thick with sincerity. "Whatever happens next, you're not alone. I'll help you rebuild. We'll figure it out together." Nari's gaze softened, her violet eyes meeting his with a warmth that Jason hadn't seen before. It was as though, in that moment, the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had yet to face seemed lighter, more bearable. For the first time, it felt like they were truly a team, bound not just by the mission, but by something more. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "I never thought I'd find someone who would stand by me like this. You've made a difference in my life, Jason. I don't think I could have done this without you." Jason looked at her, his heart beating faster than usual. He hadn't expected any of this, hadn't expected her to enter his life, hadn't expected to feel this sense of connection, this sense of purpose. But now, as they sat together, surrounded by the pieces of a broken ship and a shattered past, Jason realized that Nari had brought something more into his life than just the challenge of fixing a spaceship. She had brought him something he had long since abandoned, the belief that he could be a part of something greater than himself, something worth fighting for. "We'll get there, Nari," Jason said, his voice firm with conviction. "We'll get there, no matter what." She smiled again, a smile that reached her eyes this time, and for a moment, the weight of everything seemed to fade. There were still many unknowns ahead. The journey to repair the ship was far from over, and the road ahead was full of obstacles. But Jason knew one thing for certain. They weren't just fixing a ship. They were building a future where, together, they could rebuild what had been broken. Chapter 4. The Final Push. The days turned into weeks, and the final pieces of Nari's ship began to fall into place. They had sourced parts from every corner of Earth scrap yards, engineering labs, and even salvaged materials from old, discarded space equipment. Jason's workshop, once a haven for his simple, everyday work, had transformed into a place of innovation and invention. It had become the beating heart of Nari's mission, the place where they both worked tirelessly toward a common goal. The ship was nearly ready to launch. Nari had always known that this moment would come, the moment when she would have to face her past, to confront the invaders who had destroyed her people. But as the days drew closer to the ship's completion, she began to feel a different kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of facing an unknown enemy, but the fear of losing what she had found on Earth, her connection to Jason. The quiet moments they shared in the workshop, the way they supported each other, had become her sanctuary. The thought of leaving that behind, of venturing into the vast unknown, unsettled her in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Jason," Nari said one night as they worked, the dim light of the workshop casting long shadows across the walls. Do you ever wonder what's going to happen after all of this? After we fix the ship, after we find my people, what's next? Jason paused in his work, looking up at her. There was a hint of uncertainty in her voice, a vulnerability that had not been there before. I don't know, Jason admitted, his voice steady but thoughtful. I don't know what's going to happen after this. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. I won't let you go through this alone. Nari's expression softened, and for a moment, she seemed to relax. She stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his arm, a gesture that, though simple, meant more than words could express. I think I'm ready, she whispered, her voice full of determination, but also something deeper, a sense of belonging, a sense that, no matter the future, she had found something worth fighting for. I think I'm ready to face what's next. Jason smiled, his hand gently touching hers. The ship was ready. They were ready. And no matter what the future held, they would face it together. As Nari powered up the ship's engine, the hum of the machinery resonated throughout the workshop, a sound that filled them both with a sense of finality. The journey ahead was unknown, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. With the stars above them, they soared into the unknown, their hearts bound together in a mission that had started with a broken ship, but would lead to something much greater. Their journey was just beginning.